So we are a market maker. Now, and that's a great question that leads me into the other point, which is bilateral transactions versus non-bilateral transactions. A bilateral transaction, one buyer, one seller. So where a broker might sit in the middle and matchmake and bring those parties together, right? The corporate buyer, as you so nicely stated, correct, on one side of our market, the purchaser, and then the developer. We're not matchmaking. And that's actually what speeds up the process immensely.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. And we did have Jason Beck. He's a founding member at Zettawatts. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Jason, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Kelsey. I am a sales and marketing go-to-market strategist. I've been working in the retail energy field, the wholesale energy field for the first 16 years of my career. After I worked for several Fortune 500 companies, I said, wait, why am I building businesses within a business? Although it's a great place to build a business because your floor is limitless and everyone's there to catch you and support you. Entrepreneurship without Fortune 500 companies is much harder, as I now know. But then afterwards, I started a business called ARECs with a few different partners. And then I found myself really trying to figure out a way to help this idea of climate change and what could I use my skills for in climate as I came into 2023. What I am now up to is working at Zettawatts, as you mentioned. I also still manage two other jobs on top of this, but Zettawatts is probably one of my most important goals of this year and this upcoming year because we're really trying to help fight climate change.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like you've had an interesting journey bringing you to Zettawatts. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about your role and Zettawatts in general?
Sure. So Zettawatts is a 0-1 startup. Our founder, Scott Case, his first claim to fame was he was the founding CTO from Priceline. And as a 90s kid, man, Priceline changed the world of travel in early 2000s. And so fast forward, he's done many other cool things, which if you have him on your show, he'll tell you all about. He's done so many cool things since, but in 2021, his mind started looking at this climate change issue that we have as well. Most people talk about the 1.5 degrees, and that's a bad breaking point, although I did hear coming out of this recent COP28, which was a big conference in United Arab Emirates the last 2 weeks, that we might actually reach that by 2024. So this problem is getting worse, not better. And as he looked upon this issue that is climate change, there's a book that's called Speed and Scale. Speed and Scale is a great book for anybody looking at climate change. It really breaks down what the problem is and how we're going to fix it over the course of the next 27 years. And 25% of that is going to come from greening the grid, changing the composition of the electricity we use, especially with all of this background that we're going to electrify everything, right? More EVs on the road, electric heating appliances. The demand is just going to continue to go up for electricity as well. So how do we make that electricity coming from a green resource? And that's what we started putting our heads together this year. As a jack of all trades, I think we all pick up whatever we can, whenever we can. But my main two roles within the company is in energy industry expert, as well as working with our retail energy suppliers and our retail energy channel partners. The channel partners are definitely, some of them are in retail, some of them are ESG consultants. They're definitely spread across the universe. But that's a little bit about my role.
Interesting. And, I'm curious, I want to dive a little bit more into Zettawatts and really understand kind of like the technology and what Zettawatts is bringing, in the energy space. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So when we talk about climate change and we talk about greening the grid, In 2008, there was this market that was created called renewable energy certificates, also known as RECs. And you'll hear me, RECs, not WRECKS, but RECs, renewable energy certificates. The market was created in 2008, and it was to give renewable energy power generators another revenue source besides the raw power that they get to sell into the market. And this other resource was called a renewable energy certificate. Now, some people ask why? Why wouldn't you just put solar on your rooftop? The answer is because only 20% of rooftops in the country actually qualify for some type of reasonable financial payback based on where the sun's going. So if you also know a little bit about electricity, you know that as power goes into the grid from a generation source, it gets mixed with everything. And then whatever comes through your 3-socket electricity, looking at my 3-socket electricity in my room, that is going to be a grid mix. So the REC was produced because that is the way you say you're green. You buy those renewable energy certificates, and each one is 1 megawatt hour of power. You get to say you're green, and green from this resource. Well, over the course of 2008 through 2023 and GHG protocols, greenhouse gas emission protocols and other things, local rules coming out, that is called, you might have heard the term greenwashing, right? Oh, well, that's greenwashing. So let's break down why that is before I get into what Zettawatts does. Why that is because of how the REC market was created. It's most companies are looking at their usage for the past year in Q1 of the following year, buying RECs off of old projects to green their usage, washing my usage with RECs. This doesn't change the composition of the grid, right? It doesn't mean that now all of a sudden there's 45% coming from renewable energy. It's the same mix that it was when you bought the REC. So now, well, how do we be more impactful? Their other option that's been in existence for the last couple of decades is PPAs or VPPAs, power purchase agreements or virtual power purchase agreements. What those are contracts for both the power and the REC. It's bundled. It's an asset. This is think 2-page REC contracts, 20 to 200-page PPAs, very complicated structures. But that's how renewable energy developers say, hey, you want to make an impact? Make my project bankable with one contract. Now, if you think about that whole process, now you're pairing up one customer trying to find the perfect project and making this match. It's like a one-on-one, like, hey, can we find that perfect needle in the haystack? My opinion, and Scott's obviously as well, because he founded this company, was that, hey, PPAs are not going to be the solution that everybody's able to take. So where's this middle ground between a REC and a PPA? And so what we created is the Additionality REC marketplace. We don't buy RECs. What we do is we buy pre-COD, 5 or 10-year strips, COD, cash on delivery, but like when the project gets energized, right? When it's actually going to get delivered to the market. 5 or 10-year strips off of brand new projects, and the supplier, meaning the project developer for wind, solar, other ways to heat and cool things we can get into about what people are doing to generate new renewable energy from different resources. One of my jobs is to work with them and let them know that we have this market. Now, to get into a little bit more of the details besides what, so an AREC is, yes, it's that same impact, right? Of I am buying off of a future project, I am changing the grid mix. I will be able to say which projects that I am helping come to fruition. But the supplier also signs an affidavit saying that it was used in their financing stack so that that impact of that claim can be real. One more piece before I wrap on what Zettawatts does. So as we created this Additionality REC market, 2 to 3 times it's going to cost what a REC costs. So a PPA, if you break down the electricity plus the REC plus premium for additionality, it's going to be about the same. It's just you're putting all that premium into the REC in our market, right? Because that's what the customer wants and that's what they're willing to pay for anyway. What we found over the last 2-3 months now, actually, now that it's December, is that with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the $370 billion bill passed by our government, there are tax credits that come off of these projects. And the big new news coming into this year was the Transferability Act. What this allows is instead of whoever wants to take benefit from the tax credit, they used to have to sit on the project, meaning they had to be an owner in that project. If you're a publicly traded firm, that means that sub-entity needs to be reported up on. Now, if you're a real estate investment trust, I can't imagine that you want to be reporting on a solar asset on your financials to the SEC. So having said that, what the Transferability Act did is allow people to buy tax credits without having to sit on their owner equity table. So what we realized is, okay, now I get to go to a company who's looking at additionality RECs and saying, I'll take my $3 million, please. Or bring me $30 million. Actually, sorry, I'm doing that math wrong. Bring me $50 million in tax liability. I'll help you run a transaction. The proceeds of that transaction is going to be the $3 million that you owe me. And now you get to make your 5 to 10 year additionality claim with zero bottom line impact to that publicly traded corporate. This obviously has a lot of sustainability leaders going, oh, that's cool. And this is how we're starting to create the AREC marketplace.
Interesting. So, being honest and transparent, this is a new landscape to me. So I'm
sure the most. Please ask questions. I have to imagine the audience will be that way too. So please ask away.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's kind of two different ways into the marketplace, if I'm hearing this correctly, whether it be maybe a corporate buyer, like you said, or a project developer. Am I understanding that correctly?
You're exactly correct. So we are a market maker. Now, and that's a great question that leads me into the other point, which is bilateral transactions versus non-bilateral transactions. A bilateral transaction, one buyer, one seller. So where a broker might sit in the middle and matchmake and bring those parties together, right? The corporate buyer, as you so nicely stated, correct, on one side of our market, the purchaser, and then the developer. We're not matchmaking. And that's actually what speeds up the process immensely, because we're not looking for the perfect solution or the perfect fit. Going back to the Priceline experience, what Scott brought to the table for Zettawatts is that in the Priceline days, the buyer made the price. If you remember that name your price tool that was created. So what's happening is the corporate sustainability leaders coming in and saying, I want to buy 100,000 ARECs for 2025 vintage, 10 years, and I'm willing to pay $5. Right? That's going to be a 5 million, that's a 5 million megawatt hours, a million megawatt hours over the course of 10 years, $5 million purchase. Okay. What we do then is aggregate all of the offers coming in from the corporate buyers, and then Zettawatts is saying to the supplier market, this is what we're willing to buy an AREC for. We take title of that REC for 5 minutes before passing it on to our customer to retire. The reason why we do this is because now the developer doesn't care about the customer's credit. They care about our credit. Great. We'll call one of the banks that fully support everything we're doing for your letter of credit to get financially backable. And on the customer side, realize that, let's say that 100,000 purchase, it can be a one to many or many to one. So let's say this customer with the 100,000, I match them to 7 projects. A 30, a 30, a 10, a 10, a 10, and a 10. 6 projects. They say 7, I meant 6. Let's say project 5 out of all those for the 10,000 tells us in middle of 2024 that they're not going to actually reach their COD of 2025. One of the biggest things in energy is, is the project going to actually get to fruition? We can go into a separate half an hour about why and how that's being fixed too. But having said that, we know before the project is actually in place that it's not going to come to fruition. And what happens is in our marketplace is now that 10,000 of demand that's not going to be met, it just goes back to the top of our demand and gets the first order filled to some extent because we want to replace that before 2025 COD actually occurs. So it really de-risks both sides of the marketplace. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about that, Because you're right, those are the two sides of our marketplace. But what do we do for both of them? We de-risk both sides. This will allow transactions to go way faster and way smoother as we continue to build the AREC marketplace.
Wow. So that's really, this is a fascinating kind of conversation for me to engage in with you. So it sounds like not only are you, like you said, mitigating the risk for the two different sides, but you're also working to make sure that these projects are not necessarily going through, but you're working to increase the renewable energies out there. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, what we are doing is getting that premium that the company, the renewable energy developer, they have in their portfolio. They have this thing called additionality. Now they can sell it as a bundled PPA, or they can break it apart, go merchant with the energy, because there's wholesale markets across the country in terms of what you can sell your energy, very 20-year plus markets that'll tell you what the energy goes for. And I think it's a little bit out of developer, not laziness is the wrong word, that I'd be doing the same thing if I'm a developer. It's one buyer. It makes my life a heck of a lot easier if I can just get one buyer. Now, having said that, there's plenty of other developers out there that are not just looking at the PPA. They just want to get the most amount of megawatt hours built. And that's the same approach that Zettawatts has too. There will be people that buy PPAs. Great. You're making huge impact. Thank you. There will be people that buy RECs. Cool. You're doing something, right? That premium is going to a developer somehow, some way. But the premium for additionality to create a project to happen, that's going to be about 2 to 3x of what the current spot market REC prices go for. And what happens is now, because I've given this commitment for $6.50 to $8 a megawatt hour versus 2.5 to 3, that letter of intent to pay 2025 for 10 years, the developer is actually taking Zettawatt's commitment. They're going to their financing, their main financier, and saying, look, I got a bankable cash delivery receipt. Can I have financing to go build the project? Now, couple that together with tax, selling off the tax credits, merchant energy, and an AREC, you will have a bunch more projects get into queue now just based on that. So we really are trying to, the goal of Zettawatts in general is to turn up the speed dial in the speed and scale problem, because one-on-one transactions, they don't get us to where we need to be. Here's a little fun known fact for the audience. This year, we reached our biggest year in renewable energy development. Rockstar! 33 gigawatts of solar, a little bit more of wind. Just so you know, we have to actually keep this pace for the next 10 years to solve our problem by 2035. So I ask many of my friends in the supplier developer world, I say, how was this year? I am exhausted. This was so hard. I was like, great, 9 more to go. Let's go. So the point is yes, we are developing at a more rapid pace than we ever have. And eventually the PPA buyers will all be gone. And there's going to be other companies that can only do it a certain way because of their corporate structure. It's a lot of what we're finding in our corporate side of our, marketplace. There's a lot of use cases for why a PPA just doesn't work for the customer. And last time I checked, customer actually makes all the rules when they make purchasing decisions, as we all know, marketing. So, yeah.
So, you mentioned something that I want to circle back on, and that was talking about the vision of Zettawatts. And it sounds like, one, the concern about, like you said, reaching by 2024, the concerns of global warming. So it sounds like, the Zettawatts goal and vision for the next 10 years is to continue that. I think you said 33%.
Yeah. So the goal of Zettawatts is really to continue to make renewable energy projects pencil. It's called bankability. Sometimes pencil is what I call it, right? It's the model that says, is this project going to make money or not? Because the investors are the ones that are going to determine whether it gets built or not. So that whole process, we are constantly working with developers to figure out, okay, what else do you need to get these projects built? And that's the vision of the company is speed and scale to the energy transition problem. Now, I'll go one step further because you asked the question, which is Scott's leadership has been absolutely amazing to somebody like me who's done a couple different startups and looking to, a founder, somebody who's been around the block a million times. His BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal is well beyond just bringing speed and scale to the development problem. It's also to figure out ways how corporate America can be more in front of customers with this information. And I'll foreshadow and say that sometime in next year, you'll start to see a little bit of information coming out from Zettawatts about how the SEC could actually change some of their reporting on these companies to establish where sustainability spend actually gets above the line and not below the line. Right now, any corporation that spends money on sustainability, that's like a negative hit to their earnings per share. So that's one that's like, oh, if I'm the CFO, it's like, sustainability or profitability. I can't answer that. That's every company. I know what I would wish the answer was, but every company has to answer that for themselves. I think that because these corporations are looking at those type of metrics, we need a platform to try to stand on, even beyond just making money or getting more renewables. We want to actually move this renewable goal forward for corporations. They're the ones that are going to really they're going to help make this happen. There's going to be lawmakers and rules, and we often say, so a couple of backdrop stories. SEC requires all publicly traded firms by 2025 to report on scope 1 and 2 emissions. 3 is being debated. I can explain what those are next. And then you have all these local ordinances, California, New York, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., where they're basically, Boston, Bordeaux. They're basically saying, if you didn't like the carrot of why you should do something, because you're going to have to report to the world how dirty or unclean or carbon positive that you are in your consumption, now comes the sticks. I'll tax you if you don't. And that's when you'll start to see the world of corporations just moving drastically, because I'm going to avoid a fine. And now there's that stick element. So happy to explain the scopes next, if that was a question.
Yeah. And then I do have another question as well. Let's go to scopes first.
Scopes are pretty easy, and I'll go through them quickly. It's also AI is great at answering this question. My generic answer is going to be scope 1 is the emissions that come out of your operations directly into the atmosphere. If you're a manufacturer, you emit, based on your manufacturing process. There you go. Real estate investment trust, the building, right? What carbon is being put into the atmosphere on that building. Scope 2 is direct usage. Wait, what? Indirect direct usage. So I use, through my manufacturing process, electricity from the grid. And in my grid, electricity is only 30% green, 40% green, 10% green, or if you're in Nevada, maybe something higher than that, right? With all of their dams and hydropower. However, now you look at your mix, and now I need to, how do I fill the rest of that position? And ARECs is a great option for scope 2. We help companies reduce their scope 2 profile. It's all we deal in. We don't deal with scope 1. We're not measuring. Scope 2 is very easy to measure. Can I have your electricity bill? Great, that's about it. And then scope 3, by the way, is all of the indirect downstream, upstream vendor emissions. So again, go back to the manufacturer. Somebody is giving you the pallets, right? And they're shipping the pallets of whatever you're putting your manufacturing, thing that you're going to ship on is. How are those pallets introduced? Did it come on a truck? Did the truck emit carbon? These are all the hard questions that people have to start answering about how to measure scope 3. Interestingly enough, on scope 3, a lot of the large companies that are trying to figure this out, the Walmarts, Amazons, Googles of the world, because they're already done with scope 1 and scope 2, they're leading the charge. Now our marketplace even becomes more intriguing, because if PPAs were complicated for them, how complicated are PPAs going to be for the downstream vendors? And so where's the easy button where a corporate who is smart enough to do a PPA, educated enough to do a PPA, they would be able to say, great, Now, how do I use the Zettawatts AREC marketplace to help all of my downstream vendors do something more impactful for the environment than just buying a REC? Because they're not going to be able to buy the PPA either. It's a little too complicated for anybody who's not an energy expert and spent 20 plus years doing this. So I know you mentioned you had another question, but it's a little bit about the scopes for the audience.
No, I appreciate that. So, you mentioned before, it sounds like not only is Zettawatts, a marketplace looking to be a leader in that, you hinted a little bit about maybe some thought leadership as well, and being able to provide guidance for, like industry buyers and corporations to say, hey, you're trying to do this. Maybe here's some recommendations on different projects that might be able to help and ways that we can support, your goals. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It all starts by us getting an understanding of the corporate. Again, publicly traded is where this is right now. I think eventually it'll become everybody, but right now that's kind of where the rules are being forced into. It all starts with asking them, what is your plan? Do you have a sustainability goal? Have you set a target by 2030 to be 50% renewable energy or something of that nature? At this moment, because we're a 0 to 1 startup, we're working with a very, very, very ideal customer profile. Those that are buying RECs today because they're doing something, and then they're getting these greenwashing claims. Hey, wait a minute, that's not impactful enough. They're looking at PPAs, VPPAs, and going, oh my God, that's really complicated. That's our ideal customer profile, because you've done something, this is too complicated, what else? Having stated that, you are right in what you're saying is I think that our ICP will continue to broaden over time. But when you're standing up a business, it's very key to focus on just your ideal customer profile. Use those to get the business stood up, different contracts, write your first few deals, write the software, which we're actively doing. The software being right now, how far along we are, is that a customer, a corporate, can come in and use the arecmarket.com. They can do forecasting and planning and compare it against current REC purchases or future ideas of REC purchases. They can also see this the tax calculation to say, oh, well, what would I need in taxes to make this claim for a net zero bottom line impact to my business? From there, they can draft an offer, they can create an offer, and that's where we're at. As we continue to build out the software, what you'll see us doing for the corporates is building out things like, here's a profile of each project that you've bought ARECs off of, and here's some blurb that you can put about it in your sustainability report. And so that's kind of where we're going is the tracking and all of that piece of it. A big thing to probably discuss a little bit is well, that sounds cool, but what about how do you prevent the supplier, the developer, from issuing RECs to multiple people? This is called double counting in the industry. And a quick answer to that is there are 40 plus REC tracking mechanisms across the US, usually by geography. And Zettawatts went out and registered in every single one of them. We are a certified holder of RECs, not a producer, but a holder of RECs in all these different jurisdictions. And this is how we're going to be able to show literally that, hey, they produced it, they put it into this market. Zettawatts is the owner now of that REC, and here's the tracking and putting it right to the customer's account for retirement. That's how you can prevent double counting. And I think that's what all folks that are playing in these type of marketplaces, they need to be really focused on that.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that focus on making sure it's an ethical transaction is really what separates Zettawatts from its competition. It sounds like, I'm sure, obviously that's the other, your other competition's goals as well, but it sounds like there's a really big focus and that commitment to making sure it's a seamless transition.
Yeah, when you're playing in these big transactions, it's going to be the number one thing that the corporation is most nervous about, especially in the emerging carbon credit marketplaces, which, by the way, they haven't had the benefit of 15 years of transactions like RECs have had. RECs are like the OG carbon credit is how I like to determine it, because it has the 15 years of actually, falling on your face and greenwashing claims and double counting and all these other things that people have been concerned about. So yes, I would say everyone says they are, ethical, and yet what do you do? And that's what I would challenge everyone with is, if you're a corporate and you're trying to find out if somebody's ethical, drill in. What are you doing to prove to me that this is not greenwashing, that this isn't double counting, that this is additional? And it is the GHG protocols, because there's a lot of smart people in a room somewhere figuring out what the rules are as we speak. We're just going to continue to make sure that our standards are to the top of that. Right now, for instance, one of the companies I named previously, large PPA buyers, large companies doing this across the country, like Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, etc. Their GHG, their protocols for what's additional is actually a little bit higher than the GHG protocol, and we just said, okay, well, that's what we're going to shoot for, because that's the best known thing today. So yes, to your question, absolutely, definitely a very, very strong pillar of what we're trying to do here at Zettawatts is be ethical as absolutely can be, in making sure that these companies get to actually make their claim.
Well, Jason, I think this has been a terrific conversation, very insightful and educational. I appreciate you taking the time to break down RECs, to break down everything, the cycle, the marketplace. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with before we head out?
That's a good question. I challenge everybody who's going to be a human on this planet for the next 10 years to think about climate change, not from a perspective of, is it real? Is it not real? If you spend enough time, it is as real as can be, and it's certainly a problem. But almost spend the time on what can I, or what can my company, what can we do to be in front of the problem? And what I mean by in front of the problem is this is something that's going to dominate our lives over the next 10 to 20 years. I just mentioned that it is now 2024, possibly when we reach 1.5. That's when all the alarms go off. So a metaphor for climate change, which I'm stealing from Scott, because I'm going to give him credit, right? That's why I'm just saying it. But Scott made a metaphor that I can't get out of my head, which is climate change is like boiling a pot of water. When you start boiling the pot of water, you start to see little bubbles. You might go away and say, oh, just starting. I'm going to go walk to the other side of the room and, I don't know, clean up something. Is typically what's in my house with 2 kids, is I'm cleaning something up. And then all of a sudden I look over and it's like boiling over the pot, and I'm rushing over to turn it down. And oh my God, what happened? And that's how climate change works too. You'll start to see a couple of little indications, and then all of a sudden it's boiling over. And the problem with climate change is once it's boiling over, you can't actually put the water back in the pot. Okay. So that's kind of the metaphor that I'd love to leave the listeners with is that let's not let it get to the point where it is bubbling over. Let's look at these indications that are happening, treat it with love, kindness, and respect. And then each individual will figure out what can you do? What can we do as individuals? Another piece is eating less beef. As I looked into climate change and looked and understood, and I was like, wait, what? That's another 15-20% of the problem is we eat too much beef as a society. Yes. And so as I challenge everyone to be educated on it, however, the metaphor is just, that's my leading moment of the day.
Parting gift. Well, Jason, I think that's terrific. It's practical advice for, people who may not be a corporate buyer, again, just leaving with great advice. Jason, I think this was a terrific conversation. And I really appreciate you being on Business Ninjas today.
It was awesome. And to call myself one of the people that are on Business Ninjas was just such a lovely chord as well. So thank you so much, Kelsey, for having me on. Look forward to speaking with folks from the audience. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn. And happy to help in any way I can in regards to climate change.
Terrific, Jason. Well, thank you again.
Cheers. Bye, Kelsey. Have a good one.